Next, we would like to invite IIU's favorite and lovable Sudanese debater, Tasneem.
It's interesting for a team that tells you that they agree principally with democracy, and a team that tells you that this is a very good proposal, but let's wait 20 years and let's try and implement this later, because somehow in 20 years these countries with all of their problems will become democratic, and then we can have all the perks. We think necessarily it's about time that we stop waiting for things to happen and start thinking that Muslims can't do things right now and maybe we should try and wait for the future, because we think if you don't start, you will never get there. That's the problem with that side of the house. I'm going to analyze several things in today's debate, and I'm going to look at them deeply, because this is what their problems are. They have several problems. One, they tell you that disparities already exist, and this is the first thing I'm going to analyze. Secondly, they tell you democracy in its form and essence should start at the grassroots, and what we're doing is evil. I'm going to analyze that too. And finally, they're going to tell you that it's going to result in a lot of political tensions, which they didn't really get into, but I'm going to show you how it's even better under our model. So let's start straight out, because they tell you, you know what, disparities exist, economic disparities exist, these people have different ideologies. We want to start by telling them that they've forgotten that this is the OIC we're talking about. They have a common agenda, and that is the beginning and that is a start. We tell you most of these countries are there for a reason, and that common agenda is to forward Muslim interest, and that common agenda is Muslim development, and that's the first step. But we tell you secondly, differences are good. There is absolutely nothing wrong with countries having different ideologies and different economic policies, because what happens then is that every single one of these countries can pitch forth their ideologies, and they can be debated so we can see which one of them is the best policy that we should enact for the Muslim Ummah to develop. So we think it's a strength that they have different ideologies. We think it's a strength that there's disparities between them, because we think that's when you get the best possible policies. Because within parliaments, there are plenty, I'll take you later, within parliaments, there are plenty of disparities. Parliaments are where people come in and discuss them. The Democrats and the Republics have completely different ideologies. Politically, economically, socially, they, ladies and gentlemen, are poles apart. But when you put them in parliament and they're able to express their ideas, that's when you're able to come to common understanding, and that's when you get something done, and that's good. But finally, we tell you, right, which model gives us the best policies? Because in the end, what we want and the outcome eventually is that this parliament has to come up with the best policies. Because there's something that they haven't proved to us. They tell us status quo is fine and it's good. But if we want the best agendas, where can we get them? In meetings, 2-hour meetings, by very busy foreign ministers, or in debate sessions that are held by experts whose sole purpose is to forward these agendas in parliaments. We think the best policies are those who are concentrated, because one, you have a specific individual whose sole task and objective is to do that, but secondly, in concurrent running parliamentary sessions where these things can be debated. Yes, sir.
Ma'am, how do you think the Saudi citizens will elect their representative under a democratic platform for the OIC thingy?
First of all, that brings me perfectly to the second idea of democracy. First of all, we tell you most of these Muslim countries, and first of all, we told you, Islam is not against democracy principally. One. Two, most of these countries, even if you want to talk about Saudi Arabia, even if you say they are monarchies, they also are starting some sort of parliaments on their own. Yes. We've seen in the Middle East that most countries have begun to have parliamentary systems. In Jordan, you have a parliament. You can't just come up and say, oh, Arabs, they don't have parliaments. We think that's mean, especially considering there's a lot of Arab friends within our crowd right now. But we have further defenses to that, ladies and gentlemen. We tell you this, their burden is even more difficult, because they're trying to tell us that democracy works best from the grassroots. We shouldn't have a top-down approach. We tell you, have fun with that. You know, if you really are coming up here and saying that we should impose some sort of democracy on these countries. Because we've told you from the onset, we have a perfect balance. We're not going to restrict or impinge on the sovereignty of these countries. But we tell you necessarily, when it comes to the Muslim Ummah and Muslim issues, this is where we think it's important. Why? Because their main contention is this. These countries aren't democratic, therefore, even if you have elections, that guy's mandate will not be respected by the government. We beg to differ. We tell you that you have lost faith in the power and the voice of Muslim individuals within that state. Because we tell you that if the Prime Minister of one of these countries denies their people the right to vote in a representative to forward Muslim interests, trust me, that Prime Minister is going to have a lot of problems with his Muslim people. Because we tell you that's the check and balance balance. That's why we think his mandate will be respected and the government will be forced to listen to him. Because we tell you that the Muslim people will be pretty angry if they realize that their leader is not letting them have a say in what happens to their religion's direction and their ummah's future. So we think that's pretty good right there, because we think the people inside are going to help it. But then they tell you this, and I call this miscellaneous harms. You know what's going to happen? The evil Americans and the evil Israelis are going to come and buy that guy. We have several responses to that. One, we tell you, is it easier for corruption to occur when you have an appointed guy? Or is it easier for corruption to occur when the Americans have to bribe millions of Muslims? We think it's a lot more difficult for abuse to happen when the evil Americans and the evil Israelis have to start pushing a vote. Because when you have thousands of Muslims voting, we think it's very difficult for corruption to occur. We think it's very difficult for, all the evil conspiracy theories to happen. No, thank you. So when we think necessarily, ladies and gentlemen, it will happen. We think even if these countries are not fully democratic, we concede that these countries are not fully democratic. When it comes to Muslim issues, they need to be. Because one, Islam is not, ladies and gentlemen, in any way inflexible with democracy. It supports democracy. But two, the Muslim people want to have a say in their ummah. No thanks. Finally, right, they tell us finally this whole idea of how we're creating tensions. And they tell us, you know what, Iran is not part of the Arab League, and therefore the Arabs are going to group up against Iran. And because he watched or heard Wikipedia yesterday, he threw in examples. Let's deal with that. Under which model is it worse? Because we tell you here, under today's model, this is when lobbying is even easier, because it's a meeting. But what do we give you when you have parliament? You have one vote. Therefore, we think, ladies and gentlemen, it's a lot more clear, it's a lot more open, ladies and gentlemen, and fairer when each country gets a vote. That way, influential foreign ministers don't have a say and don't dominate meetings and allow smaller countries or smaller representations to be left out. So will it result in political tensions? We tell you, when you finally concede that every state is equal, every state gets a vote, we don't think we're creating tensions. We think we're making it a lot better. What have we told you that that side hasn't contended with? We feel that Meor gave you brilliant analysis that the third speaker on that side, the second speaker on that side of the house failed to engage with. What did Meor talk to you about? He told you, ladies and gentlemen, about how it's a strength through heterogeneity. Khalidah told you, ladies and gentlemen, how it's about time for the OIC to step up. It's about time for the OIC and the Muslims to make their mark in today's world and stop waiting for something to happen alone.